Hello and welcome to Devil's Advocate. How does the government respond to concerns and criticisms of FDI in retail? That's the key issue I shall discuss today with the Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission, Montek S Ahluwalia. Mr. Ahluwalia, in December 2002, when the BJP was considering FDI in retail, Dr. Manmohan Singh, then leader of the opposition in the Rajya Sabha, told the Federation of Associations of Maharashtra, and I quote, "India does not require these kind of reforms. These kind of reforms would, rather than create employment, destroy employment." What's happened in the last 10 years to make him reverse his position?
Well, I don't recall what was said by every person in opposition on every day. I mean, I think thinking moves forward, perceptions change, circumstances change. I don't think there's any lack of clarity today about what the position on FDI is. Incidentally, the BJP at that time was pro-reform, pro-FDI, the opposition was not. This is normal.
Quite right. There's been a somersault in positions on both sides. Let's then look at some of the principal criticisms of FDI in retail and begin with the fear that it would have an adverse impact on small retailers and kirana stores. Many people say this is proved by the fact that in Thailand, in the 5 years after 1997, when FDI was permitted, 60% of Thai-owned grocery stores shut down. How can you be sure that won't happen in India?
Well, look, I think this particular number is based on some study that I'm not totally familiar with.
But it's an AC Nielsen report.
Central point that we should make is that in a growing economy, I mean, let's say if we achieve our objective, 8+% growth, it would be very reasonable to think that retail will grow at faster than that, maybe around 9% or so. Now, on that kind of growth rate, basically the total size of the retail market is actually going to more than double in a very short time. The second point, you know, I don't think FDI is the threat to small retailers. Modern retail is the expanding segment. Now, we already have modern retail. Those who say that the small stores will be hurt, and I think they're wrong, by the way, they should actually be saying shut down all modern retail. They're not saying that.
You see, Mr. Ahluwalia, there's no doubt that retail as a sector will expand. The problem is within that, the share of the small retailer or the independent retailer could shrink dramatically. Let me give you another example. In Britain, between 81 and 99, the exact years when international retail began to expand and take over the British market, the share of the independent small retailer shrank by 50%. If it can happen in Britain, clearly a growing established economy, it can happen in India.
I think we should make two important statements. First of all, what's going to happen to total employment in retail? And secondly, are you hung up on a structure in which only the small retailer survives? Now, I mean, this is a structural change. Let me put it this way. The small retailers' competitive efficiency actually depends on what's happening to real wages. I don't believe that the modern retail can expand fast enough to raise real wages sufficiently. So what happened in Britain and what happened in Thailand is not a predictor of what will happen here. Secondly, let's be very clear about it. In the next 20, 30 years, do you want the the independent retailer to have the same share of retail that it does today? I think that's completely wrong. There is structural change. I mean, let me put it this way. This is like saying that when taxis were introduced, the share of Tongas went down. True. But you want to bring them back.
Oh, hang on a moment. You see, the problem with the example you give me is that if there were fresh jobs for the Tongawalas when the share of Tongas goes down, there'd be no concern.
Yes, there were. They went into scooters and running taxis.
I'm moving on, in fact, from the problem to do with retail stores and kirana stores to the bigger and more important problem to do with employment. After all, retail is the second biggest employer in India. It generates 44 million jobs. Now, Business Line has published a study which says that if international retailers acquire 20% of the Indian market, which they easily can do, 8 million jobs will be lost. So your Tongawala equivalent in this instance will not only lose the occupation, he won't find an alternative job.
I think this is a complete misreading, because you need to look at, do you want the modernization of the retail sector or no? If you want the modernization of the retail sector, you want an upward pressure in the quality of employment. Modern retail produces better quality jobs than traditional retail.
But far fewer jobs, that's the problem.
But my point is, fewer jobs if labor growth is going down to 1% and GDP is growing at 8-9%, jobs will be created in many different sectors.
Except for the fact that you have a population where the demand for jobs is increasing at something like 10 million a year. If your second biggest employer, retail, is actually shrinking in terms of the jobs it can provide, you're creating a problem in terms of availability of jobs.
You need to be very clear about one thing. Please look at studies on what is the quality of the jobs in the traditional retail. That quality, particularly for those employed as opposed to the self-employed, the quality of those jobs is very low. The young people with education who are joining the labor force are probably quite happy working in modern retail. They're not happy being employed in traditional retail, and that's the problem.
I completely accept your point that the quality of jobs in traditional unmodernized retail is very poor and it is not inviting, but the problem is that the quality of jobs in modern retail is equally questionable. Let me quote from UNI Global Union study of Walmart, and it's just a 6-month-old study.
Let me say, I'm not talking about Walmart. I'm looking at it as a broader. Either you say Walmart is an individual company,
the biggest of the lot, the biggest of the lot.
Maybe, but the question is that about modern retail?
Well, yes,
if it's not about modern retail, it's not relevant.
Hang on, it is about modern retail. That's why I'm bringing it up. Because Walmart I'm taking as an example, an indicator of what modern retail will do and what it will do to jobs. And I want to quote from this study. It says, the presence of a Walmart store has had a devastating impact on small businesses in the surrounding areas. And then the study continues, researchers from the United States Census Bureau found that the entry of and growth of hypermarkets has a substantial negative impact on employment growth and the survival of single unit and small chain stores. Now, can you really afford a similar impact in India, whether it's from Walmart, Tesco or Carrefour?
I think the circumstances are actually totally different. And the reason for that is that in the United States, I mean, it's very easy for someone to increase their share hugely by following a particular pricing policy. The consumer in the United States is geared to rushing off to hypermarkets, buying for a week, buying for a month.
That won't happen in India.
That is not going to happen in India. I mean, look, the Indian case is one where I think modern retail at the moment has 6% or something like that of the total share. It'll be an extraordinary achievement if they double that in a period of 5 to 10 years.
I hear the point.
No, let me finish. We are the least penetrated by modern retail of any country, including China.
That also means that we could get penetrated fastest of all.
We should. I mean, listen, let's be clear about it. This is
so the consequences would happen faster here than anywhere else.
Ridiculous fear being pushed by people who are taking opportunity to essentially hold back change.
Okay.
I mean, these are the same people who would have said you shouldn't have malls. Are you willing to break down all the malls you've got?
You know, you say
I mean, let's be clear. There is no point in picking bits and pieces. This is a Luddite approach.
But
this is an effort to create fear.
You're using strong, some would say even emotional language. You're saying it's a Luddite approach. Yes. But let me quote one of India's most eminent economists, Jayati Ghosh, writing in The Guardian on the 20th of September, just 3 days ago. She says, again, she's using Walmart as an example, one Walmart store in India, she's not talking about America, would displace 1,400 small retail stores costing 5,000 jobs. That is the concern that many share.
First of all, the notion of modern retail versus traditional retail, it may involve much higher labor productivity at the front end, but at the back of that is an entire new supply chain logistic. So jobs are being created not in selling physically to people, but in upgrading the supply chain. Now, unless you take that into account, these comparisons are meaningless.
I take your point.
You're converting this into a Walmart discussion.
Okay.
This is not about Walmart.
Absolutely. I take the point you're making that there will be new jobs at the back end, but if there are losses in the front end which affect urban people, creations in the back end won't really compensate.
Let's get the rationale clear. We are running a very, very inefficient retailing system in which the farmer gets very little and the consumer pays too much. That's inefficient.
I'll come to
No, let's finish.
I'll come to that.
You can't. You've got to let me finish.
Okay.
The point is, do you want to increase efficiency? Whenever you increase efficiency, productivity goes up, which means that the same thing involves fewer people. But the benefits from that come higher income for the farmer, lower prices for the consumer. So simply looking at what happens in one sector is like saying every taxi displaces 50 Tongas.
Let me take up
and that's not a sensible argument.
Let me take up the point you make about efficiency and come to a different but connected concern, this time written about by Arun Jaitley in the Economic Times. He says, and this is exactly to do with the point you made about efficiency, that because India has a high-cost manufacturing base, foreign retailers will source a multitude of everyday items from low-cost countries like China. That will have a damaging... Let me finish.
No,
That
you
will have...
made your point.
I have to tell the audience the consequence. It will have a damaging impact on manufacturing with sizable losses of jobs.
You know, what he's talking about is trade impact. Tell him to go to Lok Nayak Bhavan, where there are a hell of a lot of small retailers, every one of which is stocking Chinese goods. The notion that foreign retailers are going to be faster to importing than our own either modern retailers or small retailers is actually false.
Okay, I'll accept that point.
By the way, we have a huge tendency to import. So if imports are the issue, they'll get imported whether you have FDI or you don't have FDI.
I'll accept that point.
Thirdly, last point. Today, Indian modern retail has no compulsion to do domestic sourcing. If there is FDI, they'll be compelled to do significant amount of domestic
30% from SMEs.
Yeah.
Let me accept the point you're making, because it's a counter to an Arun Jaitley argument. He'll respond to it when he wants to himself.
But as far as Arun is concerned, you should ask him about the BJP.
Let's not go into Arun.
What was the point there?
Let's not go into
Arun.
Arun.
The same point. I mean, you know.
Mr. Ahluwalia, let's not go into Arun Jaitley. That was Arun's argument, which I was putting to you. You've answered it. Let me put to you a wider concern that people have, which arises out of all the criticisms that I've put to you at the moment. People say that given that these are for many substantial concerns, why did you not introduce FDI in retail in a calibrated and experimental way? After all, in China, when they introduced it in 1992, they first of all limited it to 26%. Secondly, it was restricted to just 6 cities. Thirdly, there was a cap on the number of stores that could be set up. Now in India, you've gone all the way to 51% at the first stage. Let me finish. It's going to happen in 53 possible cities. And finally, there's no cap on the number of stores.
What do you mean by calibrated? We knew in 92 that China had introduced FDI in retail. So we calibrated it, not introducing it for 20 years. So for 20 years, we allowed the rise of a domestic modern retail, okay? So to say that we've done it suddenly is visibly false.
But why not try it out in a limited number of areas first?
Hang on a second. Let me finish. For 20 years, we allowed a modern retail segment to get into place. It's there, and it's doing a good job. I'm not sure whether Arun or anybody else wants that to be shut down because of the concern for Kirana stores, or whether people are saying that the big Indian retailers are incompetent and only these Walmarts are going to do a more efficient job. That's just not correct. Now, secondly, we have calibrated it precisely for the political sensitivity. A state doesn't want it, they don't go there.
Just a moment. You have
if a state wants it, they go there. What's wrong
You
there?
have absolutely no limit on the size of the store that can be set up or the number of stores. China.
No, you do have.
No, hang on. You have a limit on the location. On the location.
We don't have to do everything the Chinese
But China removed those limitations as late as 2005. Clearly, therefore, the Chinese were saying we need to do it step by step. India's done it at one go.
No, India's not done it at one go.
Almost.
One of the big things that India did was it first brought in domestic modern retail. 20 years in order to be able to compete with these guys. Second, it's only allowed in cities above a certain level. And third, unlike China, they're being forced to build a supply chain. I call that calibrated.
My last point about criticism of FDI in retail, many people fear that because of their size and their scale, foreign retailers will successfully lead by cutting prices. And as a result, they will be able to establish market share much easier than their Indian competitors. Then they will ramp up. Why did you not create a situation where you have a law against predatory pricing? That would have assuaged many concerns and nipped them in the bud.
You want to go to the Indian consumer and say, I'm going to have a law that prevents a retailer from lowering his price at a time when the Indian consumer is saying, for God's sake, do everything that will lower prices. I mean, this is just nonsense. And let me say something. Predatory pricing is used when you have a proprietorial sort of object. I mean, the fact is, if for 10 years these guys have low prices in order to build market share, it's not the case that the Indian system will not be able to compete, and as soon as they start raising prices, demand will switch.
So predatory pricing is not a concern or a fear. Worse still, you're saying to me you couldn't have tackled it because it would look wrong to the Indian population to do that.
Well, I'm not in favor of, say, if somebody wants to come in at the start, they're not even there. And what would you say? That you can't charge a price lower than the next door guy? That's a ridiculous argument.
Let's then take a break at that point and come back and look at what are considered to me the more positive aspects of FDI in retail. Its alleged impact on farmers, its alleged impact on consumers, and finally the message it sends to the world about India as an investment destination. That's in a moment's time. See you after the break. Welcome back to Devil's Advocate and an interview with the Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission, Montek S Ahluwalia. Mr. Ahluwalia, let's now come to areas where perhaps the impact of FDI in retail is said to be more positive. First of all, what do you, from your research and analysis, believe will be the impact on India's farmers and the wider rural economy?
Well, let me go back to another point. I'm not talking about just FDI in retail. I'm talking about modern retail. So all the benefits to farmers are really going to come from modernizing the entire retail spectrum.
And what are these benefits?
Well, I would say, let's take a simple thing. If you were willing to invest in a cold chain infrastructure, you would hugely reduce the losses that are currently being incurred on perishable commodities.
So farmer incomes will go up?
Well, simply because when an old-fashioned system is bearing high losses, it reflects itself in paying less to the farmer and charging more to the consumer. So when those losses are reduced, there'll be a rise in prices to the farmer and a reduction to the consumer. See, the other thing is that if we bring in modern purchasing system, farmers will be able to upgrade their product, diversify in the direction they want, have assured offtake of their material. And now that requires not just FDI, it requires reform of the APMC.
And when
we have to do a lot there.
And when farmer incomes go up, what impact will that have on the wider rural economy within which they live?
Well, it will clearly lead to much greater economic activity and a rise in prosperity. Now, I want to tell you that in the 11th plan, one of the major differences between the 11th plan and the earlier period is that the rise in per capita rural consumption is almost 3 times what it was prior to 2004. That's what you need to do.
And what you're saying, I take it, is that if farmer incomes go up and if in consequence there is a beneficial impact on the rural economy, the 66% of India that either live on farms or operate within the rural economy will be direct beneficiaries of FDI in retail and modern retail.
Not only that, but that income will generate employment in the rural area. So there'll be a lot of employment generated elsewhere as a result of the improvement in the supply chain.
Come now to the impact on urban consumers. What would it be for them when FDI in retail and modern retail as a result begins to flourish?
Well, I think the dominant advantage would be, first of all, much greater competition at the retail end.
Which means lower prices.
Yeah, and mainly lower prices. So some combination.
Better quality of food? Better quality of food?
I would say yes, for the simple reason that when you have modern retail, people will be much more watchful of quality. Adulteration, for example, will be much more easily spotted because people will want to take samples of this stuff.
So there are 3 clear benefits for the urban consumer: cheaper prices, better quality, and presumably easier shopping.
Yes, that's true.
Now, what message does the Indian government's decision, in the teeth of political opposition, to push through FDI in retail send to the international community about India as an investment destination?
Well, this is only one part of our message to the international community. I think the Prime Minister in his address made clear that this is not a kind of a solution for all problems, but many things are being done to reassure the world and India that we are managing the economy well, we're determined to bring down the fiscal deficit, we want to get rid of impediments in infrastructure. All of these are important. Now, what this does send as a message is that the government is quite willing, having judged that something is right, having seen that there is opposition, conduct a process of consultation, and then take a step which I think balances off the concerns of those who don't want it with the desire of many who do.
What you're saying
That's
is that
decisiveness.
What you're saying is that one message the Prime Minister set out is this: I am ready to bite the bullet and take tough decisions if they're good for India.
That's not just because of FDI. As a whole, that was his broader message. There are many other reasons why that message would have gone through, and I think they're all good.
Mr. Ahluwalia, a pleasure speaking to you.
Thanks.